You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. One of the things that that Brian Kelly has done since he's taken over is I love the access. Of course, as a media member, I love the access. He's made his coordinators available as well. And late last week, Matt House was made available to reporters to talk about the defensive side of the ball and how all of this is going. Can we start with 15, please? This is talking about the defensive install that Matt House has done so far through the first 3 weeks of spring drills.
You know, what we're trying to do in spring ball, to be honest with you, is we're trying to install concepts. All right, we're not trying to put our whole defense in. That's not what we're trying to get good at certain things. And then for us as coaches, it's a measurement as to how much volume we can carry when we get into fall camp. So, you know, I would say that it's kind of a moving target. We got a lot to clean up yet.
Now, one of the things that I'm going to be very interested in watching is remembering that this is a coach that's coming from the NFL. And sometimes, there's obviously a difference, right? Just in dealing with college kids as opposed to dealing with professionals. That's one. There's the recruiting aspect. But also, I'm always interested in what concepts NFL coaches bring. I'm going to segue in a second, but here was Matt House talking about the difference in sort of building a foundation in college as opposed to the pros.
I think the biggest thing that's different is you're dealing with all different levels of experience of guys playing, right? You know, I think building the unity of a team and building the locker room, I think those things aren't a whole lot different. But certainly the football acumen is different, right? You're trying to build that along with the techniques and fundamentals needed.
Okay, so building the techniques, lots of different skill levels, as he alluded to there. But one of the other things, you know, as far as concepts is concepts. And one of the things that he did in Kansas City was he had this position he called a jack linebacker. And we're seeing a lot of guys play in that role. B.J. Ojulari is a guy who, during his time at LSU, has been standing up. He's had his hand in the dirt. He's come off the edge. He's dropped back. They've used him a lot of different ways. Here was Matt House talking about how they're using B.J. Ojulari standing up as an outside linebacker.
To be honest with you, it's not that far off from what he was doing. I mean, he was a defensive end in a two-point stance. And in our scheme, he's similar. He's a defensive end. He's just playing out of a two-point stance. You know, at times we ask that guy to drop. At times we ask him to rush. We rush him a lot more than anything else.
B.J. Ojulari is one of those guys that I think probably has the opportunity this year to be not only an all-conference but an all-America type player. In the right defense, when his skill set now is a third-year player, coming off the edge, as a disruptor, he is going to have the opportunity to make a lot of big impact plays. And when you think about the way Kansas City's defense has been built with all of those great pass rushers, it kind of feels like you're looking for those types of bodies. You're even seeing some sets where you're getting the big bodies or edge rushers on the interior as well. Like they're kicking a guy like Mason Smith down inside. Now you have a Mason Smith and you'll have Ali Gay maybe on the inside as well to get more speed and edge rushers on the field. And one of those guys is Savion Jones, and then Xavier Carter as well as someone who's also playing that role. Two young guys that Matt House talked about was Quincy Wiggins, the freshman out of Baton Rouge, and the aforementioned Savion Jones, two guys who could be those impact guys coming off the edge.
I've seen great growth in Quincy. You know, you got to remember that he just enrolled in school 2 months ago, but he's improved a bunch. Savion's really blossomed. Excited about both those guys and what they can be, but they're both working and they're both growing. Not displeased with either one.
Also, not too elaborative about either of them, but when you look at practice film, when you read the reports, those are the types of guys. I'll throw Xavier Carter in there as well, as guys that they really seem to like in that outside role, as guys that could be disruptors coming off the edge. For me, one of the big questions coming into this year was linebacker. I think linebacker, cornerback are hand in hand on the defensive side as the two spots defensively that have the biggest questions. Typically, if I'm projecting for a season, I'll say, okay, who has the fewest questions against the most manageable schedule? When you look at LSU, I think receiver, you're deep and talented. Defensive line, you're deep, experienced, and talented. Safety, same thing. Can't say the same about linebacker. You've added bodies. You've added Colby Fields from South Carolina. You added West Weeks from Virginia. You got Harold Perkins, the 5-star, coming in. But as far as experience, you don't have a ton of it. Here was Matt House talking about his linebackers, again, the position he coaches.
Well, number one thing is they're willing workers, willing learners. They're willing on the field. They're not scared to put in extra work. And that's the first thing, right? And there is some talent, right? They wouldn't be here if there wasn't some level of talent. Maybe not a lot of playing experience, but there is some talent. And, with willing guys, we'll get something out of them.
He alluded to it there. There's talent, not a lot of experience, but they're willing. So that also means that there's great opportunity. One of the bigger surprises, though, is the guy who has the potential to be the 100-tackle guy in this defense and was the most obvious to just elevate into that role is Micah Baskerville. You've got Damone Clark going off to the NFL. Baskerville's the most logical to step into that role. Instead, what we've seen really is Greg Penn and Mike Jones running as the first-team linebackers, and Micah Baskerville's been running second team. Here was Matt House on Baskerville.
Micah's improved. He's got to keep improving, and he will. I really don't look at it. I told those guys, and don't read too much into who's running out there when the first group goes and who runs out there with the second group right now, right? Because, don't look at where you're at in the line. The reality is all that matters is when you line up against Florida State, and we're going to need more than 11, I can promise you.
That's fair to say, and it's easy to say, but of course you're going to worry about who's going out there first. Baskerville's a guy that we all thought was going to be the leader of this room. And he's your leading returning tackler, and the fact that he's not the most obvious leader of this defense makes you go, what's up there? So that's a guy that this Saturday for the spring game, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on 23. I want to see when he plays, how he plays, because he's a guy that at the end of 2020 helped stabilize things when you were awful under Bo Pelini. When he went in, he was one of the guys that when Jabril Cox was struggling, they kicked Jabril Cox to the outside, put Baskerville in the middle, and that stabilized things. And last year, Baskerville and Damone Clark were a really good 1-2 punch in the middle. And Damone Clark was, I think, the best linebacker in college football last year. And it just seems natural that Baskerville would be the next guy up. We'll see if that manifests. We'll get a look at him this weekend. And then the other part, I mentioned defensive line that I think is really good. Safety is another position where I think they're deep and talented, so much so that they have the luxury of taking some of their safeties and trying to cross-train them as outside cornerbacks. Here was Matt House on his safety group.
Coach Cook's done a good job with those guys. We got good competition in that room right now. And those guys are pushing each other and getting better. And, as we progress, I've seen those guys play things tighter and cleaner. Not where we want to be, but certainly it progressed a lot over the past 3 weeks.
Not where we want to be. I don't think anything in the defense is going to be where they want to be. But when Jordan Tolles leaves the safety room and is working at cornerback, that tells you a lot about their numbers at safety. And also your deficiency at corner. But if you're willing to take a player away from a position group, it largely says we have enough bodies here that we don't need this guy here. That's a good thing. I mean, when you've got Jay Ward and Major Burns, who's not even out there, you've added Greg Brooks and Joe Fouché, you've got Langlois, who they like in spots, mentioned Tolles and Davis and Sage Ryan. You have numbers there. You are good there. So how do those guys that need to fit their roles and who moves to corner? As I mentioned, Tolles has taken reps at corner. Jay Ward has played corner in his career as well, because that right now feels like the biggest weakness on the defensive side of the ball. And it's so odd to say it because of the DBU reputation, but Robert Steeples has a really big job, not only replacing Corey Raymond, but replacing Derek Stingley, Elias Ricks, Dwight McGlothern. Your top 3 cornerbacks in that room are all gone. And the guys you have returning haven't played a lick. Now you got 2 transfers in Mekhi Gardner and Jarek Bernard-Converse, but now Jarek Bernard-Converse is out with a fracture in his foot. You need answers at that position. Where are they going to come from? Matt House was not very talkative when he was asked about Robert Steeples in the cornerback room.
Put a guy in front of him, you go roll out there, he'll coach you up. I mean, he loves to coach, he loves to teach. I don't think it matters who's out there. As long as you have a helmet and a uniform, he's going to get you ready to practice and play.
That's really good coach speak. That's a really good job of trying to fire people up without saying a darn thing. But if you're going to watch anything this spring game on Saturday, watch LSU's receivers, which are, I think, wouldn't we all agree that LSU's receivers, that is a dominant position group, even without Kayshon Boutte? Can we all agree on that? Like, if you run through the list and you're talking about Malik Neighbors and Jack Besh and you bring in Kyron Lacey and you got Brian Thomas, like, that is an elite group of SEC receivers. See how your cornerbacks fare against them. Because that's how it's going to look every week in the SEC. And that's without Kayshon Boutte. That's how it's going to look every week in the SEC. That'll be a very good indicator of where this group is, how far they have to go. And I'll grant you, there's going to be no Jarek Bernard-Converse. He's expected to be a starter. But if you think you're getting through the whole season with 2 cornerbacks, you're kidding yourself. So let's see who maybe steps up this weekend in the spring. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.